Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I'm the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today, we have Schereéya, who is a published author, artist, and advocate. Schereéya will be presenting at the 3rd annual Autism in Black virtual conference happening April 28th through the 30th, and you can check the show notes on how to secure your ticket, or if after the conference, the replay. Today's podcast episode is going to talk a little bit about Schereéya's workshop at the Autism in Black conference, which is the title of their workshop is Representation of Autism in the Media. And then we will also be talking about, in light of the recent passing of certain trans bills, the connection between autism and transness, and also why the queer trans connection is especially important to recognize in the Black community. I ask that you listen to this conversation with openness and understanding and enjoy today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm very excited about today's guest. Today, we have Schereéya, who is going to be talking to us, one, about their presentation at the 3rd annual Autism in Black virtual conference, as well as some other very important topics. So I'm glad to have you here. I have read your amazing bio already, but can you tell the listeners what you would like us to know about you and some more information about you?
Sure, I'd love to. So like you said, I'm Schereéya. Like a ray of sunshine. That's usually how I introduce myself to help people know how to pronounce it. I use they, them pronouns. I also recently have started using he, him pronouns, which is new but exciting for me. And what else? I live in Pittsburgh now, but I am from North Carolina. So I love people to know I'm from the South. I love to rep being Black from the South, being country, soul food, home cooked meals, all of that. Cup of iced tea, but especially like being queer from the South, which I think we don't always get to talk about a lot. And I'm an artist. I consider myself an artist. So I do visual work. I'm a poet. So you can get a copy of my poetry book, Prayers and Pixies. And I make theater. I just love telling stories. I love to think about like people, what makes them tick, where they come from. What's that thing that makes all of us human, but all of us so uniquely and individually different? That's kind of the question I'm always asking in my work. And so I come to it from a really kind of scientific background, usually, as well as a really kind of whimsical, kind of fairy tale related background, because I think there's overlap in both of those things that we don't maybe always make time for. So that's usually how I think of myself as a creator and as an artist. What else can I say about my background? I have a day job. I do like to talk about this because I work in sales for a software company. And so that's one of the ways where like all my intersections, so being queer, being autistic, being Black, all of those intersections tend to come into play a lot on a daily basis. So I do like to talk about that because it's sort of different from my art life and my art world.
Thank you for that. I can relate to being country and from the South. My family is from Alabama. Yeah, so, you know, there are many, I didn't grow up in Alabama, but just having that family background, I think has definitely shaped my outlook and how I approach a lot of things, just because of being Black and from the South. So I understand that. And then when you add in, you know, extra intersectionalities like being queer, I'm sure your experiences, are also really shaped from that as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Very much so. Yeah.
So can you tell us about your presentation that you will be doing for the 3rd annual Autism in Black Conference? Just something, a little intro. Don't give people too much because they got to come to the conference and check you out fully, but give us an intro of what you'll be talking about.
Sure. So my presentation is representation of autism in the media. And this came about from some writing, some like observations I had been doing and some writing that I had been doing, first tweeting a lot about things and then some articles about that representation. And I'm really interested in how the audience can shape the artwork. So in this case, if we talk about television, the people who are at home watching TV, tweeting about what they see, tagging their friends, sharing it, tweeting at Netflix, like, I didn't like this show, those types of things, how we can really start to shape the media that we want to consume. And we don't have to always let the media shape us. You know what I mean? So this presentation really kind of gets into giving tools. It's really about creating tools for the viewer or the audience member to be able to say how to look for good representation, and maybe for things that raise red flags or raise hairs on the back of your neck, where you're like, maybe this is not what I want to be seeing. Maybe this is not representing this group of people in a good way, and how we can use those tools to learn, one, like get out of our echo chambers and learn more about people who are different than us, but two, to really call out creators and studios and the people who are creating this work and say, like, we want to see ourselves, we want to see better representation, because I think that people don't always realize that they have that power.
I agree. I think that this is so important. I know that I spoke to a journalist about this very topic. I think it was when the Sia movie or video.
Yeah, it was like a short film. I think it was called Music.
Yes, when that came out. And I spoke to about it, and for me, it was just offensive when I saw the actual movie. And I think it just did not shed. I think the media has one way of how they want autistic people to be viewed. And one, it's not Black.
Right, start right there.
Yeah, start there. It's not Black. I don't see Black autistic girls portrayed in media. I can't show my daughter. Here's a representation of yourself. I can't see a representation of my own self as a Black autistic woman in the media. So that's one thing. But then to portray us in either the way of always be, what's savient is one of them.
Oh, the savant. Yeah, the savant trope.
Yes.
Yeah, we think about what's that old book? I think it's called Of Mice and Men or something.
Yes, yes. Or even the Good Doctor, that show.
Right.
Or they portray us in the light of meltdowns and things of that do happen, but they make it seem as if there's nothing else.
Right. That's your whole existence.
Exactly.
And one thing I want to point out too, when you mentioned like it not seeing that Black female representation of autism, I think that, and one of the things I want to get at in my presentation is actually talking about ways that we have these characters who are actually autistic coded, but would never say, like they don't say that person is autistic, or they don't say that they're neurodivergent. And maybe the writers don't even always know, but sometimes there's these characters that we feel like a connection to, and being able to sort of draw out the characteristics that make us see that, so that we can have those conversations and we can say like, oh, we're claiming this character, headcanon is a thing that we talk about in the audience world. Like maybe the author didn't actually say that person is autistic, but we all think that they are. And just being able to like point out those things, because it's really normalizing to say that, okay, this character, and one example, like, again, not to spill all the tea of the presentation, but one example that I think a lot of people know, and this person's not Black, but Abby from NCIS, she's the She does the like tech computer type stuff, a character that I know so many women who are autistic who really relate to that character. And being able to just pinpoint those things, you still get this way of being seen that is so valuable.
Exactly. I love the way you explain that. Thank you for sharing that. And I know I, for one, am so excited about your presentation. And I know that a lot of our attendees, all of our attendees rather, they're going to learn so much, and we are going to start a new movement.
Hopefully, that's the plan.
Yes. So something else that I know that is important to you and that we wanted to talk about on the podcast is really what has been going on lately in the world. As you listeners know, I'm in Florida, and there's a lot going on in Florida alone, but everywhere. And I wanted to talk about some of these recent trans bills that are either trying to get passed or some been passed.
Some have been. Yes. I think and I'll say I've been trying to stay off of social media for my own mental health, which is funny because I'm always thinking about and talking about media, but like I just need breaks for my own mental health. But I try to pop in every so often because that's my favorite way to get news. So yes, there are, I think the last I read earlier today, it was something like 31 anti-trans bills that were either have actively been passed or in the process of being legislated right now.
Wow.
Yeah. And that number is like jarring, right? 31. Like, what are we talking about here?
It disgusts me. I know here in Florida, the man over the state, the governor, whatever.
The governor.
I hate to say that, but whatever, that's his title. Right. One thing that we had really been fighting against is his bill in regards to the LGBTQI plus community.
Is that the don't say gay bill?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's one. And it made it really hard. I know we had a particular valedictorian who graduated last academic year, and they were not going to let that individual give the speech if they shed light on that bill.
Wow.
Yeah, so they had to actually come up with a pretty obscure way of talking about the situation, but not talking about the situation.
I see.
And, it just they think it's so much I don't even know the term that he always uses because he just irritates me every time the governor speaks.
Yeah.
But he thinks it's like some way of that we're just trying to change and get all the children and change all the children and do all of this stuff, and it's just so ignorant not to have this understanding and to always think that someone's gender identity is the same as someone's sexual identity. And that crossing to me irritates me so much, or the fact that people don't have a problem looking at a man and a woman kiss on TV, right? But everything else is a problem, but right. Their children can watch that and not feel like, oh, they're trying to change their child.
Exactly.
I think that it's such a problem. And then when it's now infiltrated into how a teacher can teach their class or what they can show their class,
right?
Yeah, or because what if my child comes from a home where the parents are two moms? Does that mean that, what does that mean for that child and their family? And I think that a lot of people don't think that way, and that's something that just irritates me.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of a lot of people don't think that way, I think that's what it is we think of queerness as something so separate and other than the quote unquote norm that people think that it's far away from them. They think, oh, I'll just go my life without, you know, like I can go to the Starbucks, and if the barista looks gay, then I'll use a different barista. Like they think it's like this little, you know what I mean? Which is bizarre. And it, like, I grew up in the South, which I, you know, said earlier, and I grew up in a church, really. My parents were pastors, and my parents were always very like, God loves everyone, Jesus loves everyone. So that's that. But I would still see other churches or other people that I went to school with or other whatever, there's always this deep idea that like, oh, being gay, like it's for someone else because I want to go to heaven. Like that's sort of the like idea that comes from that really like, I'm going to say Christian, but it's really a colonized idea, right? And it's really, and this is a thing I think is important to talk about. And I'm kind of going way macro before zooming it into like how this relates to autism. But the really macro part of it is, it's just when we live in a capitalist society, anything and anybody who flouts the norm is considered demonized because it's pushing, it's showing that it's possible to live life a different way than the way that you've been told, than the way that society has been formatted for you or formulated for you. And that's why it's always so villainized. And so it's interesting to me, right? We're in 2023 that we're having these like this surge of anti-trans bills when we think about the 80s. That wasn't so long ago. And there was this surge of villainization against queer people. And you think about, you know, if you keep tracing back in time, like these surges keep happening because queer people are just an inherent part of the diversity of humanity. Like they're going to keep having these cycles because you can't eradicate queerness. You can't criminalize it. It's not a crime. It's not like a thing that someone just chooses to do to be deviant. Like it's just, you know, roses come in red and pink and purple and all these colors, and people come in all these flavors. It's just a normal part of humanity. So I think it's really important to start with that basic framework, because you have to kind of think outside of the box, which sounds cliche, but it's necessary. And it proliferates through everything too, right? Like my kids are 5 and 2, and both of their parents are queer, both of their aunties are queer. Like we have a very queer family. And so we talk a lot about things in our house that maybe other people don't necessarily talk about. So we were playing with some other kids who I think were also around 2, like 5, 6. And one of them was putting on lip gloss. And I think one of my kids like asked for it or something. And she said, oh, boys can't wear lip gloss. And my kids looked at me like, what? Boys can wear whatever they want. Like girls can wear whatever they want. Boys can wear whatever they want. But it's just like, it's still wild to me that like 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds are still telling people that because parents are still telling them that. You know what I mean? It just trickles all the way down.
It does. You know, we are the same in our household. It doesn't matter your gender. You can dress up as a princess if you want to. You can wear nail polish if you want to, or you could, you know, do what makes you feel good, because why would I want to stop that? So the way that I raise my children, I can see that it ruffles feathers within my family. Because they don't understand why I'm just so nonchalant about it.
Right.
You know, one of my son wanted a doll for Christmas, a particular doll. He likes hair. He likes long hair. And he wanted a Rapunzel doll. I got the doll.
It's a doll.
Not going to hurt him.
Right. And it's when you have to explain, when you think through the process of like, if I say no, then my kid's going to ask why, then I'm going to have to explain to him why. And what reason could I possibly give that's going to be good enough?
Exactly. And if I'm raising children that I want them to be respected and accepted, why would I then tell them not to respect or accept other individuals? I don't understand how people can be so hypocritical of that. So yeah, we have the same conversations. We have a lot of open conversations in this household that probably a lot of families are not doing. So I can completely relate to that.
Yeah. And I think I understand, like a lot of families are not doing it just because it's hard, right? It's hard to figure out how to hold space for your kids' curiosity and also explain that the world is not always the way we want it to be. Like we have to explain to my kids, well, yeah, I use they, them pronouns. And even though other people look at me and they see a woman or they think she or her or whatever, they're actually wrong. And I know that like, it's hard to explain to you because so many people do it, but you have to trust me because I know my gender identity the same way you do. And you can decide on your own, however you want. You can change your mind later if you want to. You can be a boy forever. Like maybe that's who you are and that's who you'll always be. And that's also fine. But it's like, it is difficult and you have to be very thoughtful and mindful and intentional about those things. One thing that I like to point out too, oh, I'm having a brain fart. I'm like, what am I going to say? What was I just about to say? I'm thinking several thoughts. One of them is about liberation. That's really kind of the main thing. My partner and I talk about this a lot. Like nothing is more important than freedom. And as Black people, I think that gets very kind of drilled into us. Like we celebrate Juneteenth. We talk about how like slavery has ended, but racism is very alive in this country. And for me, it's always this drive for liberation. And I think that letting our kids be themselves is like the most free thing we can do. And also letting yourself, right? And I think that's part of it. And I think that's where a lot of the like ire and irritation and just like straight vehemence comes when it like around specifically trans issues. Because I think like for some people, they're like, okay, if you're gay, like keep that out of my face, but whatever. But they just can't wrap their head around like, why would someone, and I'm putting in quotes here, choose to be the other gender or whatever. And I think that there's two important things here. And one is that people are just afraid to be free. They don't know how to just go out and live their lives and express themselves the way they want to and not worry about what someone else will say to them or has said to them. And so that's just like, you know, that's now a you problem. Like if I choose to be free and express myself the way I know I am, then that's fine and I can. But I think the other thought is a lot of people, they're not only afraid to be free, but they don't know how. And that's, again, where we talk about representation is so important. Like if you've always thought that you have to just be the person that your parents told you were when you were a little kid, then it feels totally foreign and alien to learn that you have options, you know?
I agree. I think that one thing that I see parents do, which is something that I speak on and try to shift the mindset on, is that I see a lot of parents try to take choices away, the right to choose away from their children. They take, you know, their ability to advocate for themselves away from them. And then once they reach 18, they expect them to have all of those skills. How so when for 18 years you've drilled it into them that they can't? And now you're like, well, why don't you have the skills? They don't have the skills because you've taken that away from them.
Exactly. Yeah, we talk about that so often. So one thing, I did pull up a couple of statistics because I think it's important, like when we talk about specifically autism for Black people, to understand like the correlation of autism and queerness. So, and I don't actually know the numbers of autism in Black people statistically, but what I will say is I feel so confident that most of the Black people I have ever met in my life are on the spectrum, like without having, without them having proper diagnosis. But I think about like, the auntie who has bad nerves and never drives because it's just too extreme, or the one uncle who eats like the same meal all the time and everybody always knows what he's going to eat. There's these like these people in our families who probably also on the spectrum or have the autism, as I like to joke. And so I think that's important because it's like, we already know there's so many people in the Black community who probably have gone on undiagnosed.
Yes.
So we have to think about those numbers, like who around you is likely on the spectrum is probably you, or like if it's you, it's probably your parents and your kids, you know what I mean? So with that in mind, for numbers of like people who are Black and autistic, the autistic community has a much higher rate of being on the LGBTQIA spectrum as well. And so some numbers that I literally pulled from reading through a couple of studies on Google. So one study in 2017 found that 4.5% of Americans identify as LGBT. Mm-hmm. But they think the percentage of people who are autistic is somewhere between 15 to 35%, as little as 3 times as many. So it could be more, but as little as 3 times as many autistic people identify as LGBT as non-autistic people.
Wow. Wow.
And that's LGBT. And so I want to pull the transgender one as well. So this is from, this was a different report. Sorry, I pulled these, but I didn't write down my citations, but I'll have them later. Anyway, one study found that the rate of people who are likely to be transgender is 2 to 3 times higher in people who are autistic than people who are not autistic. 2 to 3 times higher. And so we have to be really aware that when we talk about queer rights or trans rights, we are very much talking about autistic rights.
Yes.
And this is really important in the Black community, where I think we have some of the strongest holdovers of anti-queer sentiment in the Black community. Mm-hmm. And so much of that, again, and comes down to colonization, right? It comes down to, like, when we think back to Indigenous people, both on this continent and then Indigenous Africans, or whomever the groups were that, like, our ancestors were pulled from, they were not that worried about queerness, right? They welcomed expansive gender diversity and expansive sexual diversity. And it was just revered as being a divine part of the human experience. But in America, because having to squash our pre-colonial culture was a necessary part of survival and success, we still now, hundreds of years later, have this very strong, like, deeply embedded anti-queer sentiment. And it, it comes from that church, it comes from that like anti-slave mentality, but it's not really helping our kids. Like, it's not helping our community. It's not helping our brothers and sisters. And it's not pushing us towards freedom and liberation. So I always like to start there, because it's like, if you have an autistic kid, the chances of that kid growing up to be queer or being queer right now are very high. And so we have to be able to figure out how to break those stigma in our community.
We really do, especially when we're looking at, as you guys know, I'm going to always bring the therapy side of me into the conversation. The suicide rates of Black children,
yes,
and Black queer children, and they are rising every year. So we really have to make, sure our kids understand that we're going to love them no matter what. That we are going to support them no matter what. I do not want to think of, at least for me personally, my child feeling as if I don't understand them so much, or the world doesn't because the world doesn't understand our Black children already. When they have to not also have a safe space in their home, in their feeling, and knowing that, they feel so alone everywhere, that their option is suicide, that hurts me.
It hurts, because it means that we're not protecting the most precious part of our community.
I know when my child steps outside of this home, that they are going to have to deal with so much stuff because of their intersection. So I try to make our home as safe space as possible for them. And that's what I encourage all parents to do, but especially Black parents, because we know that how the world treats us.
Exactly.
Thinking about the intersections of being Black, of being having a disability, and then being a part of the LGBTQIA community, we have to think about how, at least for Black people, it's hard for us to separate all of our intersections, because they are all together with the stigmas and the bias,
I
and
see.
all of
Yeah,
that come, racism, homophobia, all of that comes with it.
exactly. Exactly. I think about that so often when we talk about like this idea of being able to separate your intersections, because it is so hard sometimes. And I've seen this argument on Twitter actually, where it's like, are you Black first or are you gay first? Like if we have to do, Black people, then, and it's like, no. Like my gayness is a part of my Blackness. And people outside of the queer community don't always know this, but there's often like a parallel history running on Black queerness and then white queerness when we talk about the language that comes in and the words and the terms that are used to describe things, and how some of those terms are open for all queer people to use and some of them are open for Black people to use because of the history that comes with it. And of course, the fight for Black rights is what informed the fight for gay rights and queer rights. And those people who had been fighting for Black rights were able to use that experience and that resistance power and knowledge to help build up the gay rights community. And then when we think about autistic rights and the disability rights and those arguments and things that we're having, those really often piggyback off of the gay rights movement. Like, it's so hard to separate those intersectionalities because so many of us have so many of them. So it can be like a soup, like an alphabet.
It really is, because when I'm educating people on disability rights, especially organizations, and I'm telling them they're not taking into consideration the Black community, I'm like, disability rights came about because of civil rights.
Exactly.
We have to understand that because of civil rights, disability rights came along. So when you are an organization and you are not and you are a disability organization and you're not looking into the different intersectionalities, then you are not doing it right. We have to make sure that when we are fighting for rights, we're fighting for rights for all.
Exactly. Rights for all. Exactly.
Because a lot of us live at the different intersectionalities, and we have to understand. I know a lot of autistic individuals, and I know a lot of Black autistic individuals who are part of the LGBTQI community.
Exactly.
And we really have to shed light on, especially in the Black community, like you were saying, because we like to not acknowledge it or make other people feel guilty or shame and all of these things when it's who they are.
Exactly. And I love that you said that, when it's who they are, because that really drives to, I think, what my kind of summation point or like overarching idea is, and I'll share like a personal story to help illustrate this. But I think a lot of times when people think about transness and trans people, they're imagining it as like, oh, like that's a boy who likes to wear dresses, and so we should just respect their desire to wear dresses, or that's a girl who wants to cut off all their hair, and like, let's, they want us to use their pronouns, so we'll use the right pronouns. And I don't think people are really able to understand this idea of like, that's who you are. Like, so I was just having a conversation with a cousin recently, and like you, I have some family members who they just don't get it. They don't understand why we like raise our kids to be so queer affirming. And I was explaining, I said something about how this winter was the first winter literally that I can remember where I did not suffer from depression. Like I always had bouts of depression here and there, but I would always, like, I had heavy seasonal affective disorder every single winter of my whole life. This winter was the first time that I was like, I can't believe it's already spring. Like, I kept waiting and waiting. Like, yes, I've been through therapy for a while. I have special tools, all this stuff, but like, this was the first winter. And he's like, well, what's different? And I'm like, to be honest, I think it's testosterone. Like, I started gender affirming hormone care last October. So I'm about 5 months in now. And it is absolutely wild to me, the difference in my brain. Like, some of it is external anxiety. Some of it is like, oh, it feels nice to be moving forward in my gender journey. But a lot of it is just like the general chemistry of my brain. Like, I feel less anxious. Like, I feel more comfortable in my body. I feel more like like, if I always knew this version of myself could probably exist, but I was like struggling to find them. And my kind of overwhelming sense, like, I love it. It's the best thing I've ever done for myself. I don't regret it. I won't turn back. I really think about this as healthcare. But my really overarching feeling is I wish I had known this was an option when I was in middle school, because I knew back then that I was really different from every other girl I had ever met. I always had more like in common with the boys, or I always wanted to hang out with them more. And I think the autism plays a huge part of this as well. And I didn't receive my diagnosis until a couple of years ago. So definitely late diagnosis. But as a kid, I just was a kid. Like, I was a pretty non-binary kid. My parents let me dress how I wanted to, hang out with who I wanted to, play with what I wanted to. Like, they didn't really push any sort of specific gender norms on me. And that didn't really happen until I hit puberty. And I'm like, I just wish I had known that was an option back then, because I would have had a whole 10 years of my life, 10 whole years, where I didn't have to be depressed every single winter. I didn't have to be figuring out how to like imagine my future or have the will to come back again in the spring. You know what I mean? So it really is a matter of life or death when we talk about access to healthcare for trans kids and trans people. Like, it's not just drama, it's not just like being dramatic for the sake of it. Like, we're talking about biological imperatives.
Exactly. And when we're talking about our Black autistic children, for my listeners, I really want you to understand that we're talking about a higher chance of your child being a part of the LGBTQIA community, which is why it's important we understand bills that are being passed, because they can very well impact your children. And you don't want that. You don't want to have it to where your child cannot even be who they are when they leave their home. They can't stay true to who they are when they go into school. And I know a lot of people like to say, keep it out of the schools, and no. But it's who they are. You're asking them to not be who they are, but you have the ability to do that, and you have the privilege to do that, but take that away from somebody else.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about is not fair. Nobody's trying to turn your kids or things like that.
Right.
People just want to be able to live in their truth. And I think that is something that we should respect and acknowledge. And if you are fighting for any kind of rights, you need to be fighting for all rights. If you want to be an ally to one community, be an ally to all communities.
Exactly. And that is the thing. I love the way you said and described that. It's like, what if we said that every kid who was born with red hair just couldn't come to school? Like, dye your hair red. We don't want to see your red hair. Like, like, that's really what we're saying here. And that, for me, that's like the driving factor that I want people to understand. Like, figure out what biases you have on the inside, why you hold on to these so tightly. What is it about boys in lip gloss, people with neo pronouns, someone who feels different to you, that feels maybe invalidating or frightening or something like that? Because ultimately, our kids, when they go out in the world, are always going to be seen as Black.
Yes.
There's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is make sure that they feel confident and comfortable in themselves, and they have the necessary tools to be successful. Like, our autistic kids, like my kids, we all have ear protection. We all have sunglasses. we carry chapstick and lotion. Like, we have our toolkit, because the world is hard and loud and bright and brash, and it's hard to live in that world, but you can be prepared. Like, we need to prepare our kids with the same tools for if they grow up queer, if they don't grow up queer and their friends are queer. Like, if we want our kids to have every possible chance to live fully, like live the life they deserve to live in this country, then it starts with us. Like, we have to work that out on our own, so we're not projecting our own insecurities onto them.
Thank you for that. And as we wrap up, I want to ask you, what advice would you give a Black parent who is raising a queer autistic child? What can they do for themselves as the parent, and what can they do for their child?
So my first bit of advice is make sure you come to my presentation because we'll talk about some tools. There are just some tools and kits, a toolkit for being able to learn more about people who are different than you. That's the thing that I talk about is how do you get outside of your echo chamber? What tools can you use to just get that representation going? That's a big first step is if you don't know any queer people, then you can't help your kids. If you don't know a resource to show them, a list of pronouns, what websites you can trust, like who you need to talk to if they need gender affirming care. Like if you have no idea who you can talk to in your network about those things, that's step one is you need to educate yourself because your kids want to come to you with questions about things they don't know. You need to be able to answer them. So I always tell people like, especially if you are autistic, the chances of your kid being autistic are high. So start early. Like you're pregnant, read some stuff, you know? And I think it's the same for queerness, like read some books, follow some TikTok pages, find some trusted sources, go to your local library. I love telling your local library is going to be one of the most radical places you can go to. They will have the resources free and available for you. So educate yourself. That's number one. And number two is assume that you know nothing. Like your kid who you have known for 12 years and always thought they were a girl, they might literally wake up one day and be like, I have decided, I have learned, I have observed about myself that I don't fit into any gender category and I'm making up my own. And that is equally as valid as everything else because gender is very much a performance. It exists, it's real. Like I'm very much like my gender has been the same gender my whole life. I just didn't have the words to describe it. But even within that, I still get to decide like, do I wear lipstick? Do I wear chapstick? Do I wear boots? Do I wear jeans? Like the expression is part of it and that's the fun. So having the open mind to say like, okay, like you want to make it work, let's figure out how. I think that's going to be really big because you're not going to know the answer to everything and neither is your kid. But having that resiliency and that curious mind, I think those are skills that we can pass on that will make them comfortable going into any situation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know the people are going to want your social media platforms and where they can find you. And guys, I do implore you to get a ticket to the 3rd annual Autism in Black conference because this is going to be an amazing session. And we have copies of the book that we are giving out as door prizes. So you could have your chance to win a copy of the book. But you can also go in, if you can't wait until April 28th through the 30th, you can go ahead and purchase that book and we'll have all those links in our show notes. But can you tell the people where to find you besides the 3rd annual Autism in Black conference?
Yes. So I am one name Schereéya on everything. SCHEREEYA. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, even though I don't ever post there, but everywhere. So find me, follow me, I'll be around. I actually have some exciting art projects coming up this summer and fall. I've been looking for some studio space, like really branching out my practice a little bit. So if you're into poetry or visual work, or you want to know more about the intersection of art and queerness, those are all things that are coming up for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of this great information with us. Thank you for speaking with us. We really appreciate that.
Of course. I'm so glad I could be here.
And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. And we will catch you on the next episode. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.